Oh look! It's a sort of sequel to one of the world's most beloved films. Oh, this is going to be so fun. Hey, wait a minute. Did this film just start with a shock therapy scene? And what happened to Oz? Why does everything look so destroyed? And what the heck are those creepy things on wheels? Caution. The following video is an in-depth review of the movie I'm currently reviewing, which means that there will be massive spoilers in the review. If you haven't seen this movie yet, then please feel free to watch this movie first before watching this video. However, if you have already seen this movie, or you just want to know my thoughts on this movie, then keep watching. Return to Oz was one of those films that I was very curious about when I was a kid. When I was asking my mom about this film, she said that the film was actually scary. And one of the scenes that freaked her out the most was the shock therapy scene that was at the beginning of the movie. So when a film actually starts out with a child nearly undergoing shock therapy, you know that you're in for a dark, dark ride. The summary that I would give for this film comes straight from my original review of Return to Oz that I did way back in 2013. I liked the summary of the original review so much that I had decided to restate the summary here, and you can check out the original review on this channel. The film starts off with Dorothy Gale still thinking about a visit to the land of Oz, and her relatives Aunt Em and Uncle Henry are worried that Dorothy is hallucinating about experience in Oz. So they decide to take Dorothy to see a doctor called Dr. Worley, who's well known for his electric healing treatments, electric shock therapy. But later that night, when Dorothy was about to undergo the treatment, a thunderstorm causes a blackout in the hospital, and Dorothy is saved by a young girl who told Dorothy that Dr. Worley was actually driving his patients insane with his treatments. Dorothy and the mysterious girl manage to escape the hospital, but then the mysterious girl ends up falling into the river while Dorothy makes it to Oz. When Dorothy and her pet hen Billina arrive in Oz, they discover that the Gnome King had taken over Oz, and that the Scarecrow, who was the king of Oz, had been kidnapped by the Gnome King, while the citizens, including the Tin Woodsman and the Cowardly Lion, were all turned to stone. Now Dorothy, along with her new friends Jack Pumpkinhead, the Gump, and Tick-Tock, must save the Scarecrow from the Gnome King before it's too late. Return to Oz was often regarded as a controversial film for many Oz fans. At the time of the film's release, there hadn't been a darker interpretation of the famous 1939 film, The Wizard of Oz, and many fans were divided on this film. Some fans who enjoyed this film liked the fact that the film was much closer in tone to L. Frank Baum's original Oz books, especially to the books The Marvelous Land of Oz and Ozma of Oz, which this movie was based off of. However, other fans who didn't like this movie didn't like the fact that this movie was much darker in tone, especially if they loved The Wizard of Oz. For me personally, I'm in the camp who really enjoyed this movie, but not because it's closer to the original source material, which I actually haven't read yet, but because it offered a different take on the Oz mythos. I usually don't mind if a franchise undergoes a different tone in the next installment, in this case going from the lighter and softer The Wizard of Oz to the darker and scarier Return to Oz, as long as the storytelling is well told and the characters are well developed. In this case, the storytelling for Return to Oz was very well told, and I really enjoyed the dark take that the sequel had on The Wizard of Oz. It seems like this film was sort of the deconstruction of The Wizard of Oz, such as having Dorothy dreaming of the world of Oz in the first movie, and then in Return to Oz, Dorothy's constant mentions of Oz ended up getting her treated for shock therapy. Wow, what a dark way to deconstruct Dorothy's wonderful dreams in Oz in the first film. It also seems that this movie was used as an opportunity for fans of the Oz franchise to decide for themselves if Oz was either a real place or a dream. At the end of the film, when Dorothy sees Ozma in the mirror, she was going to tell Aunt Em about it, but decided not to tell her about Ozma. Then when Dorothy flipped the mirror over, Ozma's reflection disappeared. The ending was pretty vague about whether or not Oz is a real place, but it also offered a compromise with the fans who either think that Oz is a real place or a dream. When Dorothy sees Ozma in the mirror, we can safely say that everything that happened in the film was real. However, when Dorothy flips the mirror and Ozma disappears, we can also say that Dorothy dreamt everything up. So I think that it's a great way for the fans to decide for themselves if Oz was a real place or not. For me personally, I always believed that Oz was a real place, even if the first movie ended with Oz being a dream for Dorothy, and this movie helped reinforce the idea about Oz being a real place. I was also pleasantly surprised by the fact that this movie managed to have lots of focus on many characters without making the movie seem so overcrowded. I felt that each character had their own distinctive personalities that made them stand out from each other. Fairuza Balk's portrayal of Dorothy Gale was quite interesting in this film. I was a bit surprised that Dorothy Gale was being portrayed by a child actor in this film instead of a teenage girl like in the first film. It begs the question about what Dorothy's true age is and why they would make Dorothy younger in this film if the film was supposed to be a sequel to The Wizard of Oz. It could be because it's been stated that Dorothy was actually a child in the original Oz books, and since this film was supposed to be more faithful to the original Oz books, they probably made Dorothy younger in this film to help establish Dorothy's actual character from the books. Anyway, despite that, I like the fact that Dorothy is an innocent yet brave young girl who's willing to put her life on the line in order to save her friend the Scarecrow from the Gnome King's clutches. It really made me love her character, especially since she is a young child being placed into a dangerous situation. Now at first, I was quite shocked that a darker, edgier sequel to The Wizard of Oz would place a child protagonist in such a dangerous situation, such as having both Princess Mummy and the Gnome King actively try to kill Dorothy and her friends throughout the movie. However, after seeing movies like Hayao Miyazaki's Spirited Away, where a child protagonist is put into very dangerous situations, it dawned on me that this would be a great way to help the child protagonists mature as characters. Although again, I can't help but be a bit worried about seeing a young child in a dangerous situation within a movie. TikTok has shown valuing his own lifelessness, and the movie did a good job of showing us how TikTok makes good use of his robot body by using it to protect Dorothy and their friends. I also like the fact that the movie didn't really show TikTok hating the fact that he's a robot, or showing us the emotional turmoil that TikTok would have had for not being able to have human emotions, since it always shows that he accepts himself for what he is. Jack Pumpkinhead was another interesting character in the movie, as he seems to have a childlike innocence about him, as he doesn't know much about the real world and is constantly calling Dorothy Mom, which I thought was pretty heartwarming. It's quite refreshing to have a character in the world of Oz who is actually innocent, and Jack's presence in the film sort of lightens the dark mood of the movie. All of Dorothy's new friends seem to have similar personalities to Dorothy's original friends, the Tin Man, the Cowardly Lion, the Scarecrow, and Toto Dog. TikTok and the Tin Man are similar to each other, as the Tin Man's goal was to have a heart. Both the Tin Man and TikTok are non-human beings who both want to understand human emotions. Jack Pumpkinhead, meanwhile, is similar to the Scarecrow, as the Scarecrow's goal was to get a brain. Both characters usually have trouble understanding the circumstances they are thrown into, and they both want to develop a better understanding of the world around them. Bellina the Hen is a bit similar to Dorothy's dog Toto, although there are a few differences between them. Bellina the Hen can actually talk and helps Dorothy on her journey, while Toto doesn't talk at all. However, both Bellina and Toto serve as close companions to Dorothy, and they also come from Kansas just like Dorothy. Now, I wanted to take a moment to discuss about the Princess of the Land of Oz, Ozma. Now, while I understand that in this movie, Ozma was locked away by Mumby, so that way the Gnome King would take over Oz, I have to wonder about how come Ozma was never mentioned at all in the first film. I would have thought that it would have been important to mention any kings or queens in the world of Oz, so that way we would know who is really in charge of the Land of Oz. The only leader-type characters we have seen in The Wizard of Oz were Glinda the Good Witch and the Wizard himself, and they technically weren't of royal blood, at least from what I'm seeing of their characters. I was also curious about why the people of Oz would let the Scarecrow of all characters be left in charge of ruling Oz. I can see it as a way for the Scarecrow to be a temporary ruler of Oz until Ozma is found, but anyone else could have ruled Oz. I guess they chose the Scarecrow because he, along with the Cowardly Lion and the Tin Man, helped Dorothy save Oz from the Wicked Witch of the West in the first film, and he may have seemed like the right choice for them at the time. But probably the best characters in this film were the villains themselves, especially the Gnome King, Princess Mummy, and the Rulers. I honestly think that the villains were truly threatening to the protagonists in this film. The fact that they all tried to kill off Dorothy and her friends so that way they could rule Oz without anyone opposing them is quite a terrifying experience. I was impressed with Jean March's performance as Princess Mumby, as she was a truly frightening character. We definitely can't forget about the infamous head scene. Meanwhile, the Gnome King was truly the best villain in the movie, since he seems much more sadistic than even Princess Mumby and the Wheelers. Nicole Williamson's performance as the Gnome King was both terrifying and fantastic, as the Gnome King was shown to be cleverly manipulative towards Dorothy and her friends. I like the way that he acts very friendly towards Dorothy and her friends, despite the fact that we know that he's planning the demise of Dorothy and her friends. It makes his character very terrifying because he's like a loose cannon. You just don't know when he would snap or show his true colors, and what he would do to you if he gets angry. The claymation effects of the Gnome King and his army was very well done. The claymation really made the gnomes terrifying to look at, especially during the scene when the Gnome King and his minions tried to kill Dorothy and her companions toward the climax of the film. I don't have a lot to say about the Wheelers themselves because they mainly serve as Princess Mumby's henchmen, and they didn't really bring in too much for the plot of the story. But I will say that when I first saw them in the film, they were quite terrifying since they were shown as inhuman beings who happened to have wheels for feet and hands, and it made me wonder just exactly where in the depths of the underworld that they came from. Now, as much as I love the Gnome King as a villain, I have to wonder about his whole motive in the movie. Sure, it's obvious that he wants to take over Oz, but during the scene where he was telling Princess Mumby about how he wanted everyone to forget about Oz, he also mentioned that he will become completely human once he turns both Dorothy and her companions into ornaments. Now, this scene had bothered me a bit because I was wondering about why the Gnome King wanted to become human. He's pretty much already taken over Oz at this point, so how much more powerful can he get if he becomes human? I'm assuming that the reason why the Gnome King wanted to become human is because in doing so, he wouldn't be affected by chicken eggs, which are items that could kill gnomes, and still regain his powers. If that's the case, then it would make a lot of sense for the Gnome King to become human, even though the movie wasn't quite clear about this as they didn't really explain about why exactly the Gnome King wanted to be human. Now, as for the dark tone of this movie, I was quite surprised that out of all the companies that would make a dark fantasy film, it was Disney that ultimately made this sequel to The Wizard of Oz. Yes, that's right, the same company that made family-friendly movies like The Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast, and Bambi also made a film about scary rock gnomes and shock therapy. But at the same time, I wasn't that surprised because during the 1980s, Disney was going through a phase where they were churning out dark movies like Something Wicked Comes This Way, The Brave Little Toaster, and especially The Black Cauldron, and this movie wasn't any different. However, I am a bit curious about why MGM, the company that was responsible for making The Wizard of Oz, didn't make their own sequel to the hit film. Did Disney manage to buy the rights to The Wizard of Oz at this point? Or is The Wizard of Oz a public domain property where any company can use the characters as they see fit for their own movie versions of the Oz franchise? If anyone knows the story behind all this, please let me know in the comments below. Return to Oz was rated PG, and even though the reason for this rating wasn't really given, I'm going on a limb to say that this movie was rated PG for some scary scenes. Surprising, this movie is actually much more tense and frightening than what you would expect to see in a PG rated film. Scenes like Princess Mumby's infamous head scene, the scenes with the Wheelers, and the climatic battle with the Gnome King would be terrifying for some children. This movie is definitely not the sugar-coated world that you would find in The Wizard of Oz, and parents should definitely take this movie with a grain of salt when it comes to showing this film to children. Overall, I give Return to Oz a score of a 9.5 out of 10. Even though there were some plot holes in this movie, mainly surrounding the situation with Ozma and the Scarecrow, I found this movie to be a fascinating experience in making a darker, edgier take on the Oz franchise. It also helped that this movie was much closer in tone to L. Frank Baum's Oz books. So anyone who wanted a more faithful adaptation to L. Frank Baum's Oz books will definitely not be disappointed with this film. Hope you enjoyed my review of Return to Oz.